afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me in the back? Yes, okay. My name is Cecilia Van Hollen, and I am the director of the South Asia Center. And on behalf of the South Asia Center at the Moynihan Institute, Maxwell School and Syracuse University, I'd like to welcome you all to our final event of the year, a dialogue on peace building in Sri Lanka between Ambassador Kohona and Dr. Arulanandam. This is an event of great importance and one which we hope will mark the beginning of an ongoing initiative for the South Asia Center and for Syracuse University. We're grateful for co-sponsorships from the Maxwell School's program for the advancement on research on conflict and collaboration, or PARC, the Moynihan Institute's Societal Security Program, the Office of the Dean of the Whitman School of Management, and the Lubin School of Accounting. Above all, I would like to thank our colleague, Dr. Alex Tevaranjan, who is Associate Professor in the Whitman School, along with his colleague also in the Whitman School, Dr. Padmal Vitarana, for developing this initiative and for bringing our two speakers here to campus today and all the work that he put into that. Some of you here may remember that when the tsunami devastated Sri Lanka in 2004, Dr. Devaranjan spearheaded an effort for relief in the wider Syracuse University. And the result of that was to provide funding to rebuild 100 houses in Sri Lanka for victims of the tsunami. That project, along with the one today, demonstrates his commitment to helping his home country. I, too, feel a personal commitment to this process since I spent 3.5 years of my childhood living in Sri Lanka in the 1970s when my father was the American ambassador to Sri Lanka. And I have returned several times in recent years as well. We're gathering here today to see how we, as an international community interested in the future of Sri Lanka, can better understand and address the concerns of the people living in Sri Lanka in the aftermath of a protracted war which ended with the Sri Lankan Army's military defeat of the liberation of the Tamil Tigers of Elam, the LTTE, in May 2009. Over the last 3 decades leading up to that moment, Sri Lanka has seen bloody political violence. It has seen also a hardening, essentializing, and racializing of ethnic identities, which many argue were previously much more fluid, but became increasingly fixed during the colonial period and solidified in the period of post-colonial era of nation building. Thus, Sri Lanka today is comprised of 3 main ethnic communities, along with smaller but also influential communities. The Sinhalese, who make up the majority of the population, speak Sinhala, and most are Buddhist. The Tamil-speaking community is the second largest ethnic group in the country, the majority of whom are Hindu. And a sizable Christian community lives in Sri Lanka, some of whom self-identify as Tamils and some as Sinhalese. And finally, the Muslims constitute what is considered to be a third distinct ethnic community comprised of both Tamil and Sinhalese speakers. After Sri Lanka gained its independence in 1948, and particularly since 1956, the Sinhala-dominated government which came to power implemented laws which gave preferential treatment to Sinhala speakers to counteract what they perceived to have been preferential treatment given to the Tamil community under the British. These policies, however, were felt to be highly discriminatory against Tamil minorities. And the Civil War, which began in 1983, can be seen as the culmination of failed attempts to resolve the political and economic grievances of these two communities, leading ultimately to an independent struggle for Tamils in the north and east of the country. Over 100,000 people have reportedly been killed as a result of this 26-year war. The events of this civil war have alienated these two communities. The seeds of hatred have been sown by some leaders of political movements of both communities, and over time, this has taken deep root, leading to mistrust and for some a lack of desire to work cooperatively for a united Sri Lanka, where both communities can thrive together. Some Tamils feel they are not receiving their fair share and have legitimate concerns about equality and racial bias. Similarly, some Sinhalese feel that the Tamils do not want to be a part of a united Sri Lanka and want to destroy the country. Although both points of view have some element of truth, the process of resolving the crisis is not helped by the ongoing distrust and lack of respect for each other. We have here today two eminent leaders who have been articulating their concerns about this conflict in the international forum. The purpose of this discussion today is to see how we can bring together a better understanding between the two groups represented by these two speakers, the Sri Lankan government and the Sri Lankan Tamil diaspora, so that they can work together for the common purpose of providing a better and peaceful future for all communities in Sri Lanka. Both speakers have been asked to address the question of how best to remove the roadblocks to uniting the Sinhalese and Tamils to build a peaceful and prosperous Sri Lanka. Both have also been provided with specific questions to guide their responses to this broader issue. These questions are based on the grievances expressed by both communities in Sri Lanka. Ambassador Kahona will respond to common concerns and questions from the Tamil community, while Dr. Arulanandam will respond to questions and concerns from the Sinhala community. The speakers need not specifically respond question by question, but it will be useful if they cover the main issues, so this can help resolve some of these common misunderstandings. Following these two presentations, Dr. Louis Kreisberg, who is the founding director of PARC, has agreed to serve as a discussant, drawing out points of convergence of both presentations, which he sees as being ripe for fruitful dialogue for moving forward. The process of peace building in Sri Lanka is and will continue to be ongoing. A constructive dialogue is necessary, and we hope that the current discussion will contribute to that process. So we'd like to thank all three speakers for agreeing to take part in this event. I'd like to begin with the honor of introducing Dr. Palitha Kahona, who is currently the ambassador and permanent representative of Sri Lanka to the United Nations. Prior to this, he served as the Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Sri Lanka, and before that, he was the Secretary General of the Secretariat for coordinating the peace process, during which time he participated in several rounds of peace negotiations with the LTTE in Geneva and led the delegation to talks in Oslo. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Kahona.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Professor Cecilia Van Hollen. There are a number of people here whom I should thank, Dr. Arulanandan for agreeing to participating in this seminar, and also, of course, my dear friend, Dr. Alex Devarajan, who has worked tirelessly to arrange this event. What I propose to do is to go through a series of issues raised with me by Alex, but in the process, I will also bring in elements into the discussion which I think are relevant. Because after all, we are talking about reconciliation and coming together. 27 years of conflict is not something that you can easily forget. As Professor Van Hoen said, there are deep-seated suspicions, deep scars we have to overcome. And this will not be easy. It will not be done in a year or two. But I believe, as the Sri Lankan ambassador, that it is our responsibility as Sri Lankans, both Tamils, Sinhalese, and also Muslims and others, to work hard at it, to bring the communities back together. If we do not work at it, it will not happen automatically, and we will leave the field open to those who are insistent on shedding more blood and keeping the communities apart. I do not think personally that it will be good for the country or for anybody else. Now, after 27 years, Sri Lanka's conflict, a very violent conflict, which resulted in, according to some reports, close to 100,000 deaths, and many more people who were injured and maimed, suddenly ended. And it ended comprehensively on the 18th of May, 2009. Since the violence ended, not a single suicide bomb has exploded in Sri Lanka, not one, and not a single bullet has been fired in anger. This has been like the turning of a new page and entering a new chapter in a book. For the last 22 months, there has been no ethnic violence in the country. And of course, at the moment, there is a massive reconstruction and reconciliation program in progress. An unprecedented effort is underway to revive the economy of the whole country, to bring prosperity to all our people living in that small dot in the Indian Ocean. And of course, the primary focus is on healing the wounds of the bloody conflict. I must repeat again that the scars of 27 years will not be healed in a year or two, and that is asking for too much. We need patience, we need goodwill, and we need understanding. It is not only the concerns of the Tamil minority that will require attention, but also the fears of other minorities. As Professor Van Hoen said, there is also a significant Muslim minority, which is rapidly growing in numbers. We also have to remember that the majority also has its concerns. And in fact, it has been said many times by many commentators that the Sinhala majority in Sri Lanka is a majority with a minority complex. Over the years, successive governments had adopted a strategy of seeking a peaceful end to the conflict. Repeated efforts to engage the LTT in a dialogue failed, as it repeatedly reneged on peace agreements and reverted to large-scale terrorist attacks. In 2006, the government delegations met the LTT 3 times with the assistance of the Norwegians, the 4 co-chairs, and also at the insistence of the government in Colombo. The president pledged in public and offered to meet the LTT leader anywhere at any time to discuss peace, but he was rebuffed. Confident of its own invincibility and largely funded from overseas, the LTT continued its acts of horrendous violence and terrorism, exacting a heavy toll on civilian lives, property, and the economy. Overseas funds which are critical to the LTT were collected from voluntary contributions and, as we have evidence now, being given in courts in the United States, in Canada, in France, in Norway, etc., funds were collected through intimidation also. It has been estimated that sums collected exceeded billions of dollars. The LTT itself never enjoyed the loyalty of all Tamils, and that is beyond doubt. The LTT, many Tamil moderates and militants from other parties were eliminated by the LTT because they did not toe the LTT line. You'll recall that my own deputy in the Peace Secretariat was gunned down on his doorstep, and he was a Tamil, Kaitish Loganathan. there was an eminent academic from Harvard, Dr. Tiruchellam, who was also assassinated by the LTTE. And of course, it has to be remembered that the international community never acknowledged that the LTTE was the sole representative of the Tamils. There were other groups which had their own grievances, but were never aligned with the LTTE. Some of them are now with the government. Even during the height of the conflict, successive governments setting the tone for the post-conflict period had ensured a continuous supply of essential goods and services, such as free healthcare and education, to the Tamil civilians in the north and the east of the country, which at the time was under LTTE domination. For over 27 years, despite all the economic and logistical difficulties, Sri Lanka sent food and medical supplies to the north. All the schools and hospitals were funded and staffed by the government in Colombo. The ICRC had access to the LTTE-dominated beachhead almost till the very end of the conflict. The economic imperatives were recognized immediately by the government once the conflict ended. Resettling the displaced who had streamed into camps prepared in advance by the government was an immediate priority once the conflict ended. The government was confronted with the massive task of providing shelter, food, and ensuring health care for approximately 294,000 internally displaced persons. Despite all the reservations expressed at the time, especially by the NGO community and the UNHCR, the vast majority of the IDPs have been successfully returned to their villages and towns, despite the enormous cost involved. The cost of feeding the IDPs 3 meals a day while they were in the camps was in excess of $1 million a day. The UN, bilateral donors, and the NGOs played a helpful role here. Today, over 95% of the original 294,000 IDPs in the north have gone back to their own villages. And of course, you need to compare these numbers with similar experiences elsewhere in the world. And the UN recognizes the Sri Lankan experience as a model to other countries which have experienced the same. Whether you're talking of the former Yugoslavia, Cambodia, Eastern Congo, Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, IDPs have been in camps for years and years, in some cases for over 10 years. In Sri Lanka, the majority of the IDPs have returned to their villages within a short period of something like 15 to 16 months. Of those remaining in the camps, about 17,000 have been permitted to leave but have chosen to remain for two reasons. One is that some of their villages have still not been demined, and there are over 500 square kilometers of landmines in the north of the country. And there are others who have got used to living in the camps because you get 3 meals a day, there's healthcare, there's shelter, and schooling for the children. They have displayed a reluctance to go back. Persisting with the restoration effort, over 850 schools in the north have been rehabilitated, and and hospitals and clinics have been restored. Hundreds of miles of roads and power lines have been restored. The economic revival in the north is in full swing. Fisheries production in the former LTT controlled areas has continued to surge, and today over 70,000 tons of fish enter the local market from the result of the fishing in the north. 200,000 additional acres of rice have been brought under the plow. And the government has committed $360 million to the development of the north. Bilateral and multilateral donors have contributed over $2 billion. It has to be remembered that economic marginalization has been a factor which caused disenchantment in the north and the east in the past. Taking the country as a whole, a remarkable level of confidence has returned to Sri Lanka. This is particularly evident in the business community and the revival of business confidence. And this has happened largely independently of government involvement. The government, for its part, has firmly recognized the need to encourage economic revival. The record upward movement of the stock market and the steady inward investment flow is reflective of this confidence. The stock market has continued to surge and has improved by over 200% in the last 2 years. Inward tourism has rebounded by over 50% since 2010. Considerable interest has been shown by foreign investors, including large hotel chains. Shangri-La, the major Asian hotel chain, has agreed to invest over $500 million in Sri Lanka. The expatriate community has been encouraged to return and also to invest in Sri Lanka. Special tax incentives have been made available. And it is important to remember that even during the conflict, especially after the ceasefire of 2002, Tamil expatriates have built over 61 high-rises in Colombo alone. The government has also continued to revive political activity and open up space for Tamil voices to emerge. It is hoped that through this process, new leaders will be thrown up to represent the minority communities. These communities hopefully will themselves be able to contribute to an eventual political solution to the conflict in the country. While the Tamil National Alliance is now engaged in talking to the government, other political parties have had a dialogue over the years. Interestingly, the eastern province of Sri Lanka is now under a chief minister who was a former child soldier. The East, as we know, is shared equally by the three communities, the Sinhalese, the Tamils, and the Muslims. Even at the height of the LTT domination of the North and parts of the East, the major part of the East remained under government control. For its part, the government has continued to enlarge its own support base, winning a series of elections emphatically over the last 2 years. The president was re-elected with over 58% of the ballot as the last presidential election. In fact, no government has enjoyed so much popular support after 5 years in office, and the governing party won close to 2/3 of the seats in parliament at the last general elections. Now the governing party controls over 2/3 in actual fact because there have been defections from the opposition to the government. There is very, very little doubt that the vast majority of the people of Sri Lanka are solidly behind the government of President Mahinda Rajapaksa and its policies. Provincial council elections have been held in 8 provinces. Local government elections were held last month. Nobody believes that there is a magic political solution to the concerns of our minorities. Political solutions have to evolve, and the government believes that the active participation of the minorities is absolutely essential for this. As part of the reconciliation process, the government has adopted an extremely conciliatory attitude towards former combatants. The former LTT cadres in camps were initially separated and sent for rehabilitation. 11,700 were identified. The government decided early to treat most of them as victims of events rather than as criminals. Now, over 6,000 of the former combatants have been returned to their homes and communities. This was in less than 15 months since the end of the conflict. Their rehabilitation included training in basic life skills. 17,000 individuals separated from their families during the conflict have been reunited. The government has implemented a clear policy to return children to their own families, communities, and schools. Child combatants who surrendered, and the number was in excess of 700, were placed in rehabilitation centers in Ambepussa and Ratmalana and sent through a rehabilitation process. Ambepussa will be closed by the end of this year because all child soldiers have been returned to their families and homes. The center in Abepusa has won high praise from the UN, UNICEF, and other visitors. Children were given vocational training and training in English and IT and counseling. The center at Ratmalana trained children for government examinations. All of them are now back in their own communities. There are over 1,350 NGOs registered in Sri Lanka, and they are playing a useful role in our reconstruction efforts. 45 local NGOs and international NGOs and 11 UN agencies are currently working in partnership with the government of Sri Lanka on the rehabilitation and reconstruction programs. The Tamil community scattered around the world is an important factor in the reconciliation and reconstruction efforts of the government. Many of those who have returned to their villages have relatives elsewhere in the world. The government has continued to reach out to these communities. The president and ministers have continued to meet with representatives from the expatriate community. Minorities have continued to prosper in majority single areas of the country, including Colombo. 54% of Tamils live amongst the majority community. Tamils constitute over 40% of the population of Colombo. Some of the leading business houses in Colombo are minority-owned. Many of the leading professionals in Colombo come from the minority communities, and no restrictions exist on their lives socially or economically. There's another item that I would like to spend an extra minute on, if it's okay. This is the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission. The government has appointed a commission, commonly referred to as LLRC, to go into the causes of the conflict and also to make recommendations on how to avoid similar situations in the future. And the recommendations would involve identification of situations that need to go before the judicial authorities. Some refer to this as accountability. We believe that this commission has all the powers to go into this issue in depth and to make appropriate recommendations. The Attorney General's Department has already established a unit to deal with any recommendations that relate to accountability. In addition, the government has appointed an interim committee, interministerial committee, to deal with the question of implementing certain recommendations which have been made by the LLRC already. We believe that the LLRC needs to be given space to realize its goals and its mandate. And I, as the ambassador, am very comfortable that we will reach a satisfactory conclusion as a result of the work of the LLRC. We have even invited Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the International Crisis Group to come before the LLRC, but for reasons which are best known to themselves, they jointly decided not to appear before the LLRC, and we are very disappointed with this. Finally, Sri Lanka is at a crucial juncture in its history and has a unique opportunity now to bring all its people together and make their island home a better place for all. I'm confident that we will deal with the aftermath of the defeat of terrorism in a manner that will ensure peace and prosperity to all our communities. Thank you.
I'd like now to introduce our next speaker is Dr. Karunyan Arulanandam, who is a physician working in California with over 40 years' experience in the medical field. He joins us today as a representative of the United States Tamil Political Action Council, or USTPAC, a grassroots advocacy organization founded in 2009, committed to working for a political solution to the ethnic conflict in Sri Lanka. He's a native of Sri Lanka, and Dr. Arulanandam has spent many years working on health issues of Sri Lankan Tamils living as refugees in South India, and has worked with Tamils displaced from their homes to help mitigate the impact of impact of the conflict on their health. He has also published papers on the impact of the conflict on children, and he is co-editor of Victims of War in Sri Lanka, A Quest of Health Consensus. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Arulanandam.
How do I move to that?
Forward is this button.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Cecilia, for that introduction. And it's an honor for me to be here. I'm really coming back. I was here in 1994 when Professor Kreisberg had a conflict resolution conference. I'm still involved in conflict resolution. The conflict goes on. The war may have ended, but the conflict endures. I'm back, pleased to be back here. And this time I was welcomed with a little better weather. I'm thankful for that. I also want to thank Maxwell School and Whitman School for this opportunity. Now, I want to briefly respond to the ambassador. Any conflict is in any conflict there are competing narratives and different narratives, and so the ambassador gave a narrative of the Sri Lankan government's viewpoint, and I am going to give a narrative of the Tamil viewpoint. We have a different story, different experience, different way of saying things and seeing things, and that's the essence of conflict. So I'm going to give a Tamil story, but I am going to stick to the discipline that was imposed on me by Alex and by Cecilia. They gave me 5 questions to answer, and I'm going to try and tell my narrative and story within the 5 stories. I am also very grateful for this opportunity because our story has not been heard. Our story has not been heard. And this is an opportunity for us to tell our story. For instance, the war is ended. What does it mean in real life? The people who are there. There is one gentleman here who has worked with refugees. What is their lifestyle? So we're going to try and show some pictures to explain that. But peace and reconciliation requires understanding empathically the multi-ethnic challenges. Terrorism was faced in the Tamil struggle, but that's not the cause of the Tamil struggle. And to say that the story that there was terrible LTTE and terrorists and the benevolent Sri Lankan government is not true from the Tamil point of view, from our perspective. And in any case, I have never seen a powerful community that ill-treats its powerless community, the Tamils, ever coming and telling that the powerless people are happy, are unhappy rather. So that story of the government is their perspective of what they're saying, and I'm going to give a different perspective. The most important thing in reconciliation is truth-telling. We have to honestly confront our ugly past, and our past has been very, very ugly, as Ambassador Kwana himself alluded to it in some ways. And we also have to identify the root causes of the conflict. LTT was a sad phase in the struggle of the Tamils, but the struggle of the Tamils started when I was only 6 years old in 1948 when Sri Lanka got independence. And I'm going to try and give a little bit of that complex conflict for you all to understand. And then most of all, it has to be a willingness to change. And the government wants to resolve the conflict, they have to change. The people in power usually are doing well, they don't change as easily as the people who are powerless. Powerless people, displaced people, are the people who need change a little more hurriedly. Okay, this is a very brief history of Sri Lanka, and the point I'm making is that Sri Lanka is a construct of international forces, the colonial forces. Sinhalese and the Tamils didn't decide we are going to live together in one country and come together. A colonial force brought them together almost 450 years ago. It's a new reality. We got to live with it. We got to make it work. And I'm not saying that we forget, but the pre-colonial mindset, the past is very much present in the future, in the current day. The presence of the past and the mythology and the mindsets of the past is very much a political force. And we have to understand that as we go forward in the conflict. And the Tamil resistance, which started at the point of independence, if you look at, is there any way of pointing?
Yeah.
Oh, this one. The Tamil resistance, maybe I'll come out there and talk. Okay, the Tamil resistance, which started 30 years ago, was non-violent. Armed violent resistance started only in the latter phase. It's ended now. No Tamil wants to go back to violence. That was a bad phase. It was perhaps mistakes were made by the Tamils as well as by the government. But we got to move forward. And that's all this is. And in moving forward, it is not only the Sinhalese and the Tamils who are going to be involved. International community has to be involved, as Maxwell School is demonstrating today. So, international community has the responsibility to protect civilians against killing and brutality of states, as is being seen in Libya now. Ensure protection of human rights and compliance with international laws. The reason why Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and the International Crisis Group want to go to Sri Lanka is there no belief in the credible attempts by the Sri Lankan government. Sri Lankan government's attempt at self-examination has not had a good record, and that's the reason for that. Now, I'm going to go to questions. It's going to be a little disjointed because I have to answer Cecilia's questions. What makes Tamils believe the government is colonizing land? This is a very contentious issue. I want to just get over that. And the issue is that the Tamil lands are being colonized by the Sinhalese. Given that many Tamils migrate to the southern and western parts of the island, why can't Sinhalese choose to migrate to the north and east? Okay, I just want to tell you that in Sri Lanka, from the Tamil perspective, all citizens can live anywhere they want. But the government of Sri Lanka from 1948 actively promoted state settlements to change the demographic content of the Tamil population, a little like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where there are settlements going on in the Palestinian lands to change the demographic character of the land. And that is what the Tamils object to. And this is a photograph that tells you that the part in the red is the northeast where the Tamils live, and the Sinhalese migration, the migration is happening from the south, and all those little red areas are where the demographic composition of the place has changed. And that is a little different from voluntary migration, okay? And then the second question and third question, I've summarized it, was a question that I was given by the organizers, which said President Rajapaksa has mandated to solve their problem, okay? And are the Tamils discriminated? There are two questions, okay? And I don't want to answer with my version. Go to the State Department report, which came last week. The State Department has published a report on the state of human rights in Sri Lanka. Read that. I would urge all of you are interested to read that, because that gives a different view from what was presented. The State Department says, and I'm taking these 2 points from the State Department, they claim elections were problematic. Number two, election laws were violated. Now, I'm not saying, the State Department is saying it. I personally believe that President Rajapaksa has a great popularity. I believe he's well situated to solve the problem, and I pray and hope that he will. But this is what the State Department is saying. Now, second thing, the question is, are Tamil discriminated? This is a question I get from my Sinhalese friends. What is wrong with you? You are doing well. You are building high rises. You are doing this. Okay, that is a minority part of the story. However, the State Department says discrimination against the Tamils continued. They existed and they continued. Government forces were responsible for human rights violation, arbitrary killing, disappearances, torture, abuse, and impunity was a problem. No one has been arrested and claimed. So that is the state of the government, and that's the reality the Tamils face. And we have to deal with it. Please do read State Department report if you are interested in Sri Lanka. Okay? And then the basic problem is Tamils are a disenfranchised community. In a democratic system, when 70% of the people can vote a government in, the minorities have never been able to get what they want. The political system of governance does not need the government to be accountable to the Tamils. If the current system continues, the Tamils will be a permanent minority condemned to live under a tyrannical majority, which, as the ambassador himself says, is a majority community with a minority complex. So they have a problem there. They are fearful. They have to get over the fear. Okay, the Tamils cannot be beaten because the Sinhalese are having a hypothetical fear of South India invading them. So that is the problem that the government has to solve, to reconcile. At best, Tamils can participate in patronage politics. What is thought to be Tamil prosperity is patronage politics of Tamil, not freedom. And Tamils will naturally, like everyone else in the world, resist this. And that's the state of the world. Now, there is upheaval in the Middle East. All the people are rising up. And what is the essence that I see from it? Governments that are not accountable, those it governs, will be resisted by those who govern. And that is the story of the Tamil people. Tamil people rose up and went through this phase, including this ugly phase of LTTE terrorism, what you call, because the governments are not accountable. And that is the basic problem that has to be solved, for which we need help. Now, this is a picture with 1983, where there was a program which is widely believed to be orchestrated by the government, then government. It was a different government. And that's called Black July 1983. That is deeply etched in the memory of the Tamils. And that has to be dealt with as part of our past. And during that time, the president of Sri Lanka said, I'm not worried about the opinion of the Tamil people. The more you pressure the North, the happier the Sinhala people will be here. Really, if I starve the Tamil South, the Sinhala people will be happy. And there were programs in 56, 58, 61, 74, 77, 79, 81, 83, and after that there was continuous war. So this is the history of the Tamil people that people have to deal with. Okay? How does it go? Okay. So what we see as Tamils is not good governance, not benevolence, but marginalization of Tamils by a tyranny of the majority. 60 years of oppression. 1 year after independence, 1 million Tamils had their votes taken. They were called non-citizens. They were called Indian Tamils, and their citizenship was revoked. And there is no provision for protection of minorities in the constitution. So there are fundamental problems there. I'm quoting Ambassador Jeffrey Lansett, US Ambassador, in his Senate testimony. He says Sri Lankan Tamils have legitimate grievances which need to be addressed. Sri Lanka's political system, which centralizes power in Colombo, needs to be changed. And this is a fundamental problem. Now, question that have been asked by the organizers: what makes many Tamil believe that the current government is militarizing the Tamil homeland? Don't they have a need and right to protect the country from resurgency? Because after the war, the military increased. And the reason is we are going to stop the resurgence of LTT. Let me give you sure. What makes the Tamil believe there is militarization? These are Sinhala-speaking soldiers who don't speak the language of the Tamil in Jaffna. Okay? This is militarization. And these are military personnel standing around. Those schoolgirls talk Tamil. The military person with the gun speaks Sinhalese. What is the symbolism? And there have been instances of rapes of these girls by the Sinhala soldiers, and there is no justice for that. These people speak Tamil, and there is a Sinhala soldier with his army gun going on. This is occupation. This is the military camp. This is the extent of the military camp in Jaffna. And I want to tell a couple of things about militarization. Militarization of the Tamil population began when the Tamils were embarked on a non-violent Gandhian protest. And it started long before, and there's a Sinhala government agent who has written about that, Neville Jayavira. Using logic of military control of citizens is to subjugate and terrorize them. It is not to promote meaningful participation in the government. That is the logic of it. And the militarization is almost by 100% Sinhala army. Sinhala-speaking soldiers occupy Tamil area, so it's army of occupation, not militarization of a country. And who are the enemies for which the army is increasing its numbers? I can only think Sri Lanka has only one enemy, its own citizens. So that's a failure of governance. And these are the problems we have to deal with. Okay? If Sri Lanka wants to prevent insurgency, which is the logic of militarization, ensure dignity, ensure justice, ensure equality, ensure meaningful democracy and rule of law. That is the most effective way to stop it. Okay? The consequences of militarization in Jaffna: destruction of Tamil culture, education, and collective memory. There's an attempt to wipe out the memory of our suffering. This is the Jaffna Library, burnt in 1981, repository of historical documents, burnt by the military. Okay? This is Jaffna bombed. Okay? Desecration of sacred spots to the Tamils. Okay, this is churches that I used to worship in the church. That's bombed out. This is a temple. This is another church. Okay, not by the LTTE. This is by the military. And then this is something that is unforgivable. After the war, I won't say unforgivable, we have to forgive. But after the war, the symmetry of the LTTE soldiers, they had families who were there. And as Ambassador Kohana said, they have treated them as victims. But yet their grave sites were destroyed and razed. And this is an example before, after. And more humiliating was the fact, this was a gravesite in Jaffna, on top of which the army headquarters were built. Regional headquarters. Sorry. Okay. So, and then another consequences was the mass graves. All these are mass graves that have been in Jaffna. So the diaspora, the last question is about diaspora. Truth, trust, accountability are important for diaspora to work with the government. And this is from New Yorker. Government's counterinsurgency strategy, which it now wants to endorse by the international community, has been described as basic tenets were to deny access to the media, deny access to United Nations, human rights group, isolate your opponents, kill them as quickly as possible, segregate and terrify the survivors, and leave no witnesses. And this is what Sri Lanka is trying to teach other countries. And that is why Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International is opposing it. Okay? The ghost of war will always be with us until we accept what has happened. Okay. Now, the number killed varies. ICG claims 40,000. Gordon Boyce says 40,000. We need to know the correct number. It may be none. The government has said no civilians were killed. Maybe no civilians were killed, but let's find out. Let there be a free press and investigation. Those are internally displaced people. Before aerial photographed by the UN. This is afterwards. They are disappeared. Where have they disappeared? These are pictures that are in the public domain of summary execution of Tamils. The government says it is fake. Others say that it's true. Find out. Their hands are tied behind and they are shot. This is the ugly war that we are seeing. This is a reporter. She's killed. Hands tied behind the back. Okay, was she a terrorist? Was she killed? Was this fake? Find out. These are stories of people in war and multiple displacement and so on. So this is the life that Tamils have experienced. And they need answers. And that's all we are asking. Women, children, finding out all scenes of war. Mass graves. Okay. Someone has to explain this. People after the war, tied hands, shot, blindfolded. Okay. And then after the war, the so-called, these are internment camps. Everyone was herded and kept for 300,000 people were herded and kept there. And the most important, and these are scenes of their people, most of them have been left out. But the most important slide is this one. There is, according to the Bishop of Mannar, 150,000 people missing who are not accounted for. The top line is where the numbers given by the government is shown. And the bottom line is the numbers that came out to the camps by the UNHCR, UN OSHA, or the humanitarian agency. And if you count it, they're still unaccounted for some 100,000, 120,000 people. Where have they gone? Maybe they are there. But all these good works, someone has to account for them. Human Rights Watch has come out last week saying the government has to account for people one by one. That's necessary for the families, for reconciliation, for getting over this hurt. Okay? Building trust is the first step in reconciliation. Development is essential. All these high-rise buildings and hotels are essential. Human beings are not economic animals only. It is not a substitute for dignity. Patronage politics is not the same as rights. And we have to differentiate between the two. And role of the diaspora, we are going to be the voice for the voiceless. It's a self-imposed job. We don't get paid for do this. We just do it. We work for credible, independent investigation. The government investigation is not credible in the eyes of the Tamils and in the eyes of the international community and in the eyes of the human rights community. Work for accountability for all those who are missing. And work for dignity of the Tamils. Tamils have been not given their dignity. Lies have been told about them. Propaganda has been told about them. We feel that. Maybe we are wrong. But let's sit and talk. Let's discuss. Let's debate. Work for the political rights of the Tamil. Work for free press. Press is highly stifled in Sri Lanka. And we want to share our insights because we are part of the human community. We are a part of the human family. We think our experiences are being going to happen. It's part of the human experience. It's happened before. It will happen afterwards. But we hope we can do better. Professor Kreisberg spent a lot of time trying to do something about it. And we want to be part of that. And with that, I'll end. And thank you very much. I hope I made it in the time.
Thank you, Dr. Arulanandam. Dr. Louis Kreisberg is our next speaker, Emeritus Professor of Sociology here at the Maxwell School and also the founder of PARC. He specializes in the resolution of social conflict, and he has agreed to provide us with some discussion comments on these two presentations. Thank you.
Let me know if you can't hear me. You've heard two very thoughtful, heart-rendering presentations of people dealing with a terrible, terrible conflict. On the day in which we Americans are remembering the opening of our Civil War 150 years ago with the shelling of Fort Sumter. Reconciliation takes a long time, and it's still underway in the United States, and not to speak of earlier ethnic cleansing in this country, this land. At the same time, we know there's a kind of urgency. The longer reconciliation takes to get in motion, the harder it is to deal with, and the hurts remain. And we've heard a great deal so far about what the situation in Sri Lanka. And I was not asked to be a discussant as an expert in Sri Lanka. I've never been there. We did have a workshop here years ago, and I learned something, and I've learned some since. But I would want to put this in a framework of reconciliation in general, lessons that we know and what is important, and then hope that this conversation will continue because it's essential. It's clear that conflicts, even though we talk about conflict resolution, conflicts don't get resolved. They get transformed. And we usually, in the field, try to pay attention to a constructive transformation from some destructive, devastating, injurious conflict to one which is well managed, which people feel is legitimately being dealt with. That's what a political system is supposed to provide, a way to conduct differences, fight with some mutual respect, and to some extent, that is what these speakers were both trying to talk about. How could this ongoing conflict between a majority and minority groups in Sri Lanka manage that relationship? And they both spoke about the importance of reconciliation in bringing that possibility about. I'd like to talk about this very complex notion of reconciliation in terms of four general dimensions, which go by different names, and different people emphasize different things. But I'll speak about truth, justice, security, and respect. And all of these have been addressed to some degree in the presentations that you've heard. The idea of respect is very important. Sometimes that's spoken of mostly in terms of mercy and forgiveness. I want to talk about it in a more general sense, that there is some mutuality of understanding of the other's humanity. The adverse of that, or the other end of the continuum of that dimension, would be humiliation, degradation, and obviously humiliation is a hugely important basis for conflict. People who are humiliated really resent it. And there are all kinds of shades between being humiliated and feeling full mutual respect. Citizenship and the recognition of citizenship is one aspect of mutual respect, because it does say that as citizens, all people in a particular political order have certain rights. One observation about this matter of rights. There is now huge agreement, a lot of consensus in the international community in the world about human rights. But which human rights? In the United States, we put an emphasis on one set of universal human rights recognized by the UN, mostly ones that speak to individual rights of citizenship, of political rights to vote, to express oneself as individuals. But interestingly, in some other provisions of other protocols of the UN, there's a great deal of emphasis on economic and social rights, and also on collective rights. And I think that's part of the issue here when we speak of rights, to what extent these are individual or in some ways communal or collective. And that obviously is the basis of the contention in Sri Lanka at the outset, and to some extent remains. There is the matter of security, and part of the thing of recovering and dealing with the aftermath of mass killings and fearful violence to ensure security for all the people. And that sometimes goes against another principle of justice, because sometimes justice is understood as to punish those who have done ill and have done bad, and they should be punished for it. But that sometimes conflicts with who gets how much security and safety so that they can continue their own work and be willing and open to others. And as you will see, the complexity of reconciliation is that it's multidimensional, and sometimes working for one part of it can hamper dealing with something else. How much truth, what kind of truth should be shared? How do you get consensus about what is the truth? That's very central to reconciliation. To get to it raises issues about justice. Justice for whom? Is judged by whom? The minimal kind of justice, of truth that probably is critical in reconciliation is to recognize that different people may hold different aspects of truth. Gandhi, when he talked about nonviolence, talked about it as truth-seeking, the idea that none of us had the whole truth, and in a struggle, we learn a more comprehensive truth by recognizing the other's partial truths to our partial truths. And one minimal kind of thing is to recognize the narratives of each other. In the Israeli-Palestinian one, there's a lot of exercise to try to learn that. In the United States, between the white and African-American communities, the narratives of the past are somewhat different, and after a while we begin at least to recognize that there are differences in the way we've experienced our history. It might be useful to have efforts at developing some agreement, or at least some recognition of different narratives. There are all kinds of avenues by which some of this work for reconciliation takes place. The speakers have talked particularly about governmental and political ways, and those certainly are important, but so are the ways of everyday people, the way in which what they read in the newspapers, the films that are made, the novels that are written, the stories that are told, and the marriages that are made. I remember being very touched when I first went to Germany after World War II and met a couple. One was French and one was German in that marriage. And they thought that that was part of the thing that they wanted to do as two people, to end that enmity between Germany and France. It had gone on for generations of terrible mass killings, and it's been transformed by all kinds of actions, including a couple marrying, including building the European coal and steel community and building a European Union and developing a new identity as Europeans. Transformation is possible. The Soviet Union was transformed. Apartheid in South Africa ended. To everybody's crimes. I remember talking to white South Africans when apartheid was ended. They were exultant. They were so pleased with themselves that they had contributed to the ending of apartheid, even though that may have meant that they had lost some power, some economic power, some political power. They felt it was good. It was good. That was necessary. Some of them even left afterwards. But they still had that period of really joy and still pride that they were able to transform that terrible relationship into something which was so good. When I didn't prepare any remarks, I figured I ought to respond to what speakers would say. And I must say I was a little stunned at the end, how to try to talk to you about it. So I want to end on that more hopeful note that transformation is possible. It does, as the ambassador said, take work. It doesn't happen by itself. And I think you can see that both speakers are trying to address somehow, from somewhat different perspectives, but somehow the same vision that there would be mutual respect, understanding, some sharing of truth, and security and well-being for all the people in Sri Lanka.
Now we have time for questions. I think if the two speakers could each come up, and we can take questions, and we ask that you do try to limit yourself to one question each, and we'd like the speakers to try to limit your responses to maybe 2 minutes each, just so we make sure that we have time for questions. And Dr. Priestman, would you like to? Your chair disappeared. Sorry. Okay. Alex is also reminding me that we do have a sort of evaluation form that we have circulated. This is one of our requirements for the South Asia Center. So please be sure to fill this out before you leave. Thank you very much. And give it to Akram. We can open things up for questions.
I am Vishwas Mehta, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Defence in Government of India, New Delhi. Currently a professor at the National Defence College, where we also have the Sri Lankan Army officers training with us. What I understand is that during this conflict, Sri Lanka today has become one of the most militarized nations of the world. If you look in terms of the population and the ratio of military to the population. Now that the conflict is over, how are you going to demilitarize it? That is the first question. Second is, what are you going to do with the LTT cadres who have surrendered? The active cadres, many of them have died in the conflict, many civilians have been killed. All those figures which you have given is fine, but what about the active LTT cadres who were not killed in the conflict and have surrendered or are languishing in your jails?
That's not a difficult question to answer. Thank you for the question anyway. With regard to the cadres, 11,700 were taken into custody at the end of the conflict. Over 6,000 have been rehabilitated and returned to their communities. 1,440 or thereabouts are undergoing investigation and perhaps will be prosecuted for criminal activity. People who actually blew up buses with children, massacred villages, people who went and blew up temples and places of worship, etc. It is expected that the remaining will also return to their villages after rehabilitation. It is also important to remember that the LTT, as it withdrew from areas near the border of the northern province, buried huge quantities of weapons, enormous quantities of weapons that would arm an army the size of the Sri Lankan army, rather than a small rebel force. Even this week, we recovered a cache of weapons in the north. And there was another cache recovered the earlier week in Valachennai. So we have to be careful. 27 years of bloodshed, 27 years of mayhem cannot be swept aside in the hope that nothing will go wrong again. The government will never be forgiven by the rest of the population if it did that. So it will take time, but the majority of the cadres will be rehabilitated and returned, but also precautions will be taken to ensure that there will be no recurrence of the violence ever again. With regard to the question on the militarization of Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan military is probably in the region of 200,000 now, and that was what it was at the end of the conflict. It's never easy to demobilize immediately after a conflict, for the simple reason that these people are breadwinners for their families. You cannot simply tell them, okay, the war is over, you're done your duty, go home and become a farmer again. Certainly, that would be a major political problem for the Sri Lankan government. So over the next few years, we will have to work out mechanisms for getting the excess soldiers back to their villages, but with the capability of making a living some other way. So it's going to be a challenge, but the government is fully conscious of it. Already Sri Lanka has become a major contributor to UN peacekeeping operations. We have a major unit in Haiti, but this will not solve the problem of 200,000 men. These men will have to be given training, will have to be themselves rehabilitated to live in a different way and continue to be breadwinners for their families.
Can I just say, first of all, I'm sure it is a very difficult situation. I appreciate the government's different situation. But there are two comments I want to make. Number one, with regard to the LTT cadres, what was lacking, at least from what we know, and I don't know everything, is that there was no access available to them from any outside agency. And given the photographs you see of summary execution, and given some number calculations that have been done from popular press, there's lots of belief, right or wrong, I don't know, that many of them were killed and executed and disappeared. And there's a whole bunch of people who are disappeared, whose wives and parents and family don't know where they are. And there is no accountability for them. And some of them are in this camp. So the first thing that Sri Lanka should do is open up the process to international humanitarian agency. The credibility of the Sri Lankan government in the eyes of the Tamils, who have to be reconciled with them, is not very high, given the history and given the conflict. So openness and allowing media is a prerequisite. And in the case of the LTT cartel, that has not happened. That's number one. Number two is, I don't know the facts. Ambassador would certainly know more about it. But the story has come out that Sri Lanka was trying to recruit more people after the military. But even if the demilitarization doesn't happen because of whatever causes, there will be harassment and humiliation of the citizens, so long as they are there. So there are lots of intermediate steps. I don't know what it is. But the story is that there is increasing militarization. There's certainly a new army headquarters built in Jaffna over the graves of the LTTE soldiers. And I think that's all sign of militarization. It seems that military is going to become an institution in Sri Lanka. Some of them are starting doing business. They are selling vegetables and so on. So the danger of military becoming an institution, as it has happened in other countries, Egypt, for instance, and Pakistan, for instance, is there. That's number two, because of economic livelihood and so on. The last part is, I think, military building structures on the graves of LTT soldiers, be they terrorists or Ambassador himself said they are being forgiven and called victims, but destroying their graves has to be somehow repaired, and something has to be done. It's something very deeply hurtful to the Tamil population, very humiliating. And as Professor Kreisberg said, humiliation is not easily forgiven.
Dr. Arunandan briefly touched on the problem of the disenfranchised Tamils. Nearly 1 million were disenfranchised in 1948. Many of the refugees in India are the disenfranchised Tamils, about 50% of the 1 lakh refugees over there. They are delaying their return to Sri Lanka because they have not been granted citizenship yet. Your views on that?
I think factually that is not correct, because the Sri Lankan government started issuing citizenship certificates to those in India when I was in Colombo. So the process is continuing. And the High Commissioner for Refugees is actively involved in this. We had hoped that many of them would return to Sri Lanka since about 2009, but the drift back is much slower than that. The United Nations is working with the government on this, and hopefully they will return to Sri Lanka. But of course, there are other questions. Some of these Tamils in India have become made families there. They've sort of established themselves there. So there may be a reluctance to come back to a country where they no longer have a house or anything to do. So there are socio-economic factors as well. But in principle, the government has said all of them can come back, and they have started the process of issuing citizenship certificates. And then, of course, on the question of the disenfranchised Tamils, factually it is correct to say that not 1 million, but a number close to that, lost their citizenship rights in 1949. But to get the majority for the purpose of enacting this law, the government had to rely on the Tamil Minority Party. Tamil Minority Party actually voted with the government on that, the government of the day.
Okay, I think that is factually incorrect. There was one Tamil minister who voted. The major Tamil party, the federal party, started because of that. And they became the dominant party there. So yes, co-opting Tamils into government service, patronage politics happens. That's okay. So there was one Tamil minister, Mr. Ponnambalam, voted with them. But Mr. Chilmanayakam resigned, crossed over, and the Tamil parties in large part opposed that. So to say that Tamils helped to disenfranchise other Tamils is again a narrative that has to be examined, and honesty has to come out of it. It's very unlikely that Tamils would have disenfranchised other Tamils. So this whole narrative that has developed, that Tamils are tigers, they are terrorists, there's something intrinsically, genetically wrong with the Tamils, is a hangover that we have to get over. They are an enemy to the Tamil. Mr. S.W.R. Bandaranaike in 1956, when he introduced the Sinhala-only Act, said, if we have equal status to the language, to both languages, the Sinhala people will be destroyed. So that kind of feeling and fear is there, I grant that, but it's up to the government not to examine, to tell the truth, and come out. The story that Tamils disenfranchise other Tamils is a myth. Main Tamil party was formed because of the disenfranchisement. That's
I think I should elaborate further on that, because if we keep on along these lines, the reconciliation that we are hoping for will never happen in that country, because reconciliation doesn't happen by keeping on stirring up the wound and scratching on that pain. We will get a certain amount of, I'm sure, as individuals, get a certain amount of bravado by scratching on a wound, keeping up the rage. But at the end of the day, reconciliation is not going to happen through this process. We need to be, reconciliation requires both sides, and both sides must acknowledge that an effort has to be made to reconcile, not only one side. And if you keep on scratching the wound and maintaining the rage, I don't think at the end of the day we will have reconciliation. And all our efforts will be to no effect. I personally believe that one of the most important elements, if we are going to have reconciliation in Sri Lanka, is for both sides to recognize there is a future for our children, there is a future for the next generation, and that future will not be there if we keep on maintaining the rage.
If I may, just 1 minute. It is not maintaining rage. Yeah, it is not maintaining rage, Ambassador. It is telling the truth. There are two different things. And if maintaining the rage is not our intent, I fully agree we must craft a future for our children. I fully agree that we must acknowledge the past and move forward. But from the Tamil point of view, if the past is not acknowledged, if there is no apology for 1983, we won't be able to move forward.
How many times is the government going to apologize for that? Chandrika Kumaratunga did that.
I think we're going to take another question. Yes.
Is the primary demand by the Tamilese community for truth-telling, or are there also other economic reparations you're demanding? And also to you, how open is the government to the idea of opening up the history books, so to speak, to examine these human rights violations that he claims occurred? Whoever wants to answer first.
Well, I think reparations is an absolutely important part of what's going to happen, what needed. But initially, we got to establish the truth, and the reparations is certainly a part of it. Now, I'm only expressing opinions of Tamils that I know, and also the Tamils in Sri Lanka who are voiceless. They have not come out openly with accountability because they are too busy living. They want food, they want shelter. That's the first order of business. We have to feed them and keep them alive. But reparations, yes. Truth-telling, yes. All these are part of it. And certainly the Tamils have to admit their mistakes. I'm not saying the Tamils were pure and that there was something else. But everyone has to rethink, refashion, and go forward.
On the question of reparations, the government has accepted that in principle. In fact, one of the underlying principles of the LLRC, Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission, is that the government itself will provide the compensation. The basic thinking behind the LLRC is restorative justice rather than punitive justice. There may be elements of punitive justice which will emerge from the results or the findings of the LLRC, but basically the thinking is along the lines of restorative justice. It is because of that within months the government has started restoring the roads in the north, connecting the electricity. The agriculture has been almost restored to its former self. These things will continue. The children will be sent back to school, not to military training camps as it happened over 27 years. Children will go to school now, enter university, do well in life. And the government has taken that as its own responsibility. So preparations will be made available, remembering that we are a poor third world country, but this will happen.
I was just wondering, I can only imagine living in a country like that and having to deal with the sort of things that you guys have had to deal with. How will you be able to spread education about this issue, or how will you be able to spread understanding, feeling what you guys have felt and having that impact? How will you be able to make people want to have a dialogue with the other side, both of you being so affected by this issue? Because it's obvious that there are two victims and two aggressors in this issue. Both, have felt this impact, and how will you be able to spread understanding between the two groups? How will you be able to repair that wound? And how will this be approached in sort of an educational, like in a history class, in a Sri Lankan history class? How will this issue be talked about? Because it is a huge part of your history. How will you be able to give an impartial view of both sides?
Yeah, from my perspective, I don't know the answer. I try, and I don't think I succeed very much, but I keep trying. And I tried in 1994. But that's the question you should ask Maxwell. And they should be able to answer it. And South Asia Center, it's a question for them to really craft. It's a very difficult story, as you can see, Ambassador Palitha Kohana's perspective is very different from mine. And we both believe in this perspective. I'm sure we genuinely see different facts, different interpretations, and there are different narratives. How do you overcome them? You got to ask Professor Kreisberg. He's been doing that for a lifetime, and help us. And from my perspective, I think the Tamil people's struggle is a very genuine struggle, which has been stigmatized, clouded by the LTTE phase and whatever that, all the complexities of that. And I'm still trying to get my story out. And I don't think I still succeed, but I do my best. But here is the expert, Maxwell, who should answer this question.
From my perspective, volumes will be written about this in years to come. There are studies like the Maxwell School. There are other places also which are examining this issue. I think it's a conflict that deserves study, not only because of the causes for the problem, but in the way that it will be resolved in the future. And I sincerely hope that as a country, and I have a commitment to my country because I'm going to live there, the next generation will live there. And not only the Sinhalese, but the Tamils, the Muslims, the Mukkus, the Burghers, etc., etc. And there are now increasing numbers of non-Asian Europeans living there. So we need peace, we need prosperity, and we need to move forward. And to do that, my personal view is, and I believe the government shares this view, that you need to move forward, not while looking into your rear vision mirror. You have to keep your eyes focused into the distance, into the future. And we need to achieve peace.
I want to thank you for your questions. I think that's an excellent question and kind of gets to the heart of why we have put this event together in the first place. And I'm going to let my colleague maybe make some concluding remarks because we are running out of time. But I do want to say that from the perspective of the South Asia Center, we feel that it's important to have these kinds of forums like this, and that it's very significant that the two speakers have agreed to come and speak with us side by side, and that in and of itself is hugely significant in our view, which is why we put this event together. Alex Tevaranjan from the Whitman School is just going to make a few concluding remarks, and then we do have a reception up in 341 Eggers, which everybody is invited to. So.
Let's give a round of applause to the two speakers. I'm proud to say Ben is my student, but I didn't set this question up. And it was incredible, this question, and I'm happy that Maxwell already has an answer for this. But before I go there, Ben, I have a question for the two speakers. From the many questions that you have heard from Syracuse, what is the message that you're hearing? And I want to say the simple message from Syracuse. Look at me, two gentlemen. Syracuse cares. And Dr. Arulanandam, tell the Tamil people that Syracuse wants to understand their struggle more and help them live with dignity, both in Sri Lanka and abroad. Ambassador, tell the people of Sri Lanka that Syracuse is committed to a united Sri Lanka and, more importantly, unity within the Sri Lankans. We recognize that the military victory may have prevented a divorce, and it has, but it has distanced the two spouses. And there's a lot of work to be done. We're with you. Now let me ask Syracuse a question. Are you guys ready for a question? Tell me, in a world where individuals are driven with self-interest and nations by their geopolitical interests, why should a third world nation and a minority within that should believe that we really care? Do we? Can I tell them the truth? Will you allow me to tell them the truth? Let me tell you that we care not because we are saints. We care because we have common interest. We as an academic community want to learn from the experiences of the many nations out there. More importantly, we want to use scholarship in action for the betterment of nations and the education of our students. That's why we care. Common interests. Now, in order to give an expression for our concern for Sri Lanka, we have created a website called Syracuse for Sri Lanka. So let me just pull this up here. I know many of you want to ask questions. I have good news for you. For the next 1 week, you can visit this website, very easy to remember, Syracuse4srilanka.org. Syracuse for Sri Lanka. And even now, questions are coming online. People are watching. This was started just 4 days ago. And look at the number of hits already. So, Ben, this is the answer to your question. 2,312 in 4 days, 4 hits. Right? Many people have posted comments. And what is the purpose of this website? We have it right here. Because of common interests, we shake hands. Number one, the U. The purpose of this web exchange is to find ways to unite Tamils and Sinhalese to build a peaceful and prosperous Sri Lanka. How do we plan to do that? We want to understand. We want Tamils and Sinhalese to understand the fundamental differences. You saw the different views from the two, but this needs to be understood and agree to disagree. You see it this way, I see it that way. And we hope this website will play a role in that. More importantly, we want to network opinion leaders. The people who shape the thinking of the people, we want to bring them together and find common interests. Because when you find common interests, you start thinking differently. When you think differently, you will see a solution. Because currently, can I tell you, I am a Sri Lankan and living among an academic community here. Can I tell you with the current state of mind, what the Tamils want, Sinhalese feel too scared to give. Country will be divided. But what the Sinhalese are willing to give, Tamils feel like, what, you think we are beggars? After all this is what you're going to give us? There's no solution, guys. Mindsets needs to be transformed. And then we will begin to see a solution. So finally, embrace a way forward. And just in case you think, because sometimes the comments come, people think that, let me show you just one poll result right in front. We asked a question. This is not scientific, so I'm embarrassed to share as a professor. But it gives you 79% of the people who have participated in this poll says, for the answer to the question, do you believe that the current government has a political solution that is acceptable not just to Sinhalese but also to Tamil? 79% says, actually 90% says no. But most of these people are coming from Australia, Canada, and US, so most of them are Tamils. But this is the interesting question. The next question we asked them was, do you believe that the current Tamil leaders have a political solution that is acceptable not just to Tamils, but also to Sinhalese and Muslims? So most of these people, Tamil voting. You see that it's much more close, 45-35. So our mindset needs to be transformed. And when this happens, we will be able to embrace a way forward. There's a Chinese proverb that says 90% of what we see is behind our eyes. What we think makes us see solutions or not see them. So here's what happened. Because when we started thinking differently, Padmal and I, Padmal is a Sinhalese, I'm a Tamil, we teach in the same department. This event is possible because a Sinhalese from Sri Lanka and a Tamil from Sri Lanka were able to transform our thinking, rise above our thoughts and says, how can we use our scholarship to make a difference? Come on, Padma, let's shake hands and do something. And there's a miracle taking place in front of us. This event is possible because Whitman and Maxwell has shook hands to do this event. And I want to thank Cecilia and your two, Amira and Anand. I don't know whether he's even here. These guys work so hard to make this miracle possible. Let's give them a hand of applause. Now, more importantly, I want to show you, see this picture? This is Syracuse community coming together with Syracuse University after tsunami because we thought different. Tamils, Muslims, Sinhalese, Americans came together. We built 100 houses like this after tsunami. Maxwell and Whitman are not interested in just talk. We want to walk our talk. That's why our chancellor has said, scholarship in action. Right below this, you see what transformation of thoughts can do. We sponsored 100 children like this after tsunami. Let's tell you what we are doing now. There's a Montessori teacher training, which was you asked about what's happening to these ex-combatants. This is an ex-combatant. It's a picture that I took. She's being trained as a Montessori school teacher. Here is a teacher. And the plans we have for the future. You see this van? Our plan is micro enterprises. We hope Whitman and Maxwell will join. You see this couple doing business in that van. So in closing, let me invite Maxwell and Whitman to come together. Syracuse and Sri Lanka to come together because of our common interest. And we can help the Tamils and Sinhalese to come together as Sri Lankans. In this way, we will be fulfilling the mission of a university which is seeking unity in diversity. Because university comes from unity and diversity. And I want to tell you, the two speakers, by coming here, by accepting the South Asia Center's invitation, you have helped a university be a university. And I want to tell the Maxwell community, by coming together with Whitman, I want to tell the Whitman, by coming together with Maxwell, you have begun a new chapter in the idea of unity in diversity. And particularly, I want to tell the Syracuse community, thank you for coming to the university and showing Syracuse cares. Thank you very much.